It's 9 a.m., so it's time to start our city council meeting. We'll begin, as we always do, with an invocation and then the pledge of allegiance, this morning led by our council member Paulette Chambers.
Let's bow. Lord, my words are, be with us. You know where you need to be in each of our lives. So I repeat, Lord, be with us. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Ms. Chambers. So my name is Sherry Barr. I serve as a District 5 council person, but also Mayor Pro Tem. I'm sad to report that our mayor, Jonathan McCall, is under the weather, not feeling well this morning, so I'll be conducting in his absence. And next on our agenda is public comments. Do we have any public comments to this portion? Will?
No, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. Consideration of a motion to approve the consent agenda, which includes the approval of minutes from our work session on August 15, our council minutes from August 15, and the executive session minutes from August 15. Can I have a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Agenda item 4 passes. Agenda item 5, public hearing and first reading of ordinance 2023-08. This is an ordinance amending chapter 18, businesses in Statesboro Code of Ordinances in order to implement article 11, creating licensing and operational requirements for event spaces. So we need a public hearing on this. I need a motion to open the public hearing, please.
So second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And so we'll call on City Attorney Kane to give us an overview on this, please.
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. This is ordinance 2023-08. This would create Article 12 in Chapter 18 of businesses. Now, and what this would do is it would create licensure, allow for licensure and regulations for places operating as event centers. So this would be non-residential locations hosting private parties, musical concerts, art presentations, or performance, any sort of entertainment, and it would apply to those establishments that do not have city alcohol licenses without the maximum occupancy levels exceeding 25. So this would not be for any sort of business meetings or anything. I just want to make clear on that. It's just for entertainment purposes, and then the regulations on there. The primary ones is that the Statesboro Fire and Police Departments may enter any event to assess life safety issues. Alcohol is prohibited unless there's a special event or catered event permit, and that there's live camera footage around the exterior perimeter that should be retained for 7 days, and encourage that they be connected to fuses. The license would be $250, and Section 18.323 sets out the procedures for in the event of any sort of violations to probate or suspend their license, and this goes along the same lines as our Chapter 6 on establishments that have alcohol licenses, the same sort of review by administrative judge that would happen under Chapter 6 as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we have anyone here to speak for this request? Is there anyone here to speak against the request? So is there anyone here to speak for or against? Hearing neither, I ask for a motion to close the hearing.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
So any discussion, council? We had some discussion about this last time. Is there any further discussion? Are we satisfied with the way it is now?
So if someone wants to have a special event with alcohol, what's the process?
They apply for a special event permit that would come before council. That would allow for actual sales by a non-licensed entity. The other option they would have, and a special event permit would have to be approved by council. I believe they have to apply 45 days before the event in order to do so. And
Do they have to use a licensed contract?
no, not under special event.
So wait, we're creating special event.
No, we're not.
venues that
Special,
don't
we already
allow
have
alcohol.
special events under Chapter 6.
Okay.
So we are not creating a new sort of, that would be under Chapter 6. We can't do that under businesses. That would have to be in Chapter 6. We already have provisions for special events.
Right.
And these are for non-licensed entities to sell alcohol. Catered events are where a licensed caterer distributes alcohol at the event, and those licenses are administratively granted by the city clerk. But any special event permit would have to come before council.
Are the servers or bartenders going to need to be trained just like they would be in a restaurant
Absolutely.
for this special event?
Yeah.
And how do you enforce that?
The same way we enforce everything under our police department in chapter 6.
So these folks will have to submit those, certificates with the application, or?
I don't know that. I mean, they,
Well, that's what my
But-
point
but we're
is,
doing
that
it.
when, if you're an alcohol license holder, you submit these things to the clerk, right? I mean, you submit your training and all that. So if you're running a special event, you're selling alcohol, how do you prove that you've taken these courses that show you can responsibly distribute alcohol to the public? Because this is the problem we've had with these special event centers, is that they run like a bar, except they just serve endlessly or scoop out of coolers. I mean, they just don't operate like a normal restaurant would. So how will we get the proper paperwork from these folks?
I can't answer that question, Councilman Boyd. You know, the question for us today is amending the event centers thing. I don't know the technicalities on how these alcohol licenses or special events are done, and those are done under chapter 6. So, you know, I understand the conversation, I understand the importance of it, but as to whether, I mean, that discussion won't change the way, you know, whether we do the event permits or not, or the event centers or not.
Well, if the people aren't gonna be trained just like anybody else would that would be serving alcohol, I'm gonna have a problem with that ordinance being written that way.
I hear you, Councilman
Me
Boyd.
also.
Did you have a comment, Mr. Perry?
I did.
Because that's exactly the problem we've had with these event centers for the last 10 years.
I understand.
Well, and to Councilman Williams' point, I don't think we're prepared to answer that question today. However, this is only the first reading, and if council is so inclined to move forward with it, before the second reading, which would be at the next meeting, we will ensure that all of the administrative processes are outlined to you before you would take that second reading. Or if you want to wait until we do that, we will come back before you, because we need to involve the police department and find out what their processes would be. We were not prepared to do that today, but I think it's a legitimate question, and we'll be prepared to do that if council sees fit, if you're gonna move forward with it, so that we can outline that for you.
Thank you, Mr. Perry. Is that sufficient, Mr. Boyd?
I mean, again, without knowing what the administrative process is, I can't be in favor of an ordinance like this, because in my view, it doesn't change anything about what we're doing, as opposed to putting a policy together, but we're still letting people that don't have any alcohol training serve alcohol at special events where they're just acting like a pop-up bar. That's been, I mean, all the incidents we've had downtown in the last 2 years have been related to an unregulated party going downtown, and usually with underage people attending.
But I think the important point with the ordinance, under the current situation, and this is the point that Chief Mike has made, and he's certainly in the room, without this, we didn't have any legal authority to enter into the event, and we could be denied access. This ordinance will provide us that access. And then the other part of it, then we would all, if we couldn't have access, we certainly couldn't regulate the servers and all of that.
Sure.
And so with that being the case, you can do one or two things. You could not act on this today, and we come back next time, or you can go here with the first reading, we come back to you the next time, we give you the detailed administrative process, and then you can adopt the ordinance if you see fit. But without this ordinance, we can't do any of that enforcement, because they could deny us access. And so that was the importance of this ordinance, to be able to have access into those facilities. And I know it's been a very contentious issue, and we're not trying to create more bureaucracy, but for the public safety, we just believe it's important
to have the ability to go into facilities, when we have gatherings, large gatherings, and we have more and more event spaces popping up all over the city of Statesboro. So, two options: table it, or second option is do the first reading, we come back to you at the second reading. Or you can say, we don't want this, and that's three options, and then we'll just continue doing it the way we do it now.
Thank you, Mr. King. Other discussion?
As I just wanted to be clear, you know, if you're able to sell alcohol at a special event where you're not normally selling it, then you're taking business away from these restaurants and other places who have physical buildings, who have staff that they've trained, who they maintain inventories and things like that. And then so you have somebody who just come and pay $200 and have 400 people at a party, and they're not trained and they're not anything. I'm telling you, that has been the problem over the past 10 years. So if there's not an administrative process to prevent that, that's going to be a problem. I totally understand being able to access the property, and I think that's a valuable part of this ordinance, so that's true. But again, John, back me up. I mean, these unlicensed parties have been the biggest problem we've had in Statesboro, and the biggest source of shootings and crimes and trickle-out effect, so.
Understood. Thank you. Just-
I am for, okaying the first reading and having all of those issues brought up and answered for next time. Can you do that?
Yeah.
Yes, sir, and at the next meeting, we have a work session, so we can detail it in the work session, and then, again, you have your second reading.
Other discussion, please.
I'm in favor of what John has proposed.
Okay. No further discussion, then I need a motion.
So moved.
So the motion is to approve the first reading and move it forward for second reading, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. So item 5, our public hearing on the ordinance does pass to move forward for second reading. On our agenda, item number 6 is the second reading and consideration of a motion to approve ordinance 2023-07. This is an ordinance amending Appendix A zoning of the Statesboro Code of Ordinances in order to implement Article 32, creating security requirements for apartment complexes, namely camera systems and controlled vehicular access. So second reading, I need the same process. Motion to open the public hearing.
So,
We don't have to have a public hearing.
Okay, so second reading, so we don't need that.
Yeah.
So I just need to call for a motion.
So moved.
Okay, to approve this to, make it law. We have a motion,
second. Motion.
right? Motion and second, so any discussion by council before we vote? This is about the cameras, and are we satisfied with what we came up with last time, no further questions, Dennis? Okay,
It only requires new complexes to install cameras, correct?
Correct.
New or renovated to the point of needing permits.
and your camera.
Renovated to the point of needing permits?
To the extent that a building permit is required. That's how we
Yeah, pretty close
administer
to
that.
it. That's okay.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. All in favor, signify by aye and Aye. Okay, any opposed? So the motion carries as well. Agenda item number 7 is the public hearing and first reading of ordinance 2023-11. This is the ordinance amending chapter 18 businesses of the Statesboro Code of Ordinances in order to implement Article 12, creating a regulatory structure to allow for mobile public vending on the city right-of-way. So I need a motion to open this public hearing, please.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
And Kane, would you remind us about, this is the mobile ice cream truck, right?
Yes, Madam Mayor Pro Tem. This is creating a licensure and regulatory framework for mobile public vending. That would be ice cream trucks, et cetera. This is not for food trucks. These are for sale of prepackaged foods. No sort of preparatory devices in the vehicle. But this would allow these these trucks to operate in the public right of way, which they do not currently have an ability to do so. And in order to operate in the public right of way, they would need one of these permits from the city of Statesboro in order to do so. So this is just a framework setting up they have to keep their sales tax records. They have to, and the vending operational rules, hours of operation between 9 a.m. and 10 p.m. has to comply with Statesboro sound ordinance. Signage must comply with our sign ordinance. Vendors, only permissible items have to display valid permits, have an audible point of sale system, may not obstruct vehicular traffic except for 15 minutes to load and unload, and they may not have out tables, chairs, etc. And they have to have, okay, so that's the extent of the major ones on there. There are also provisions regarding littering and about selling ice cream and other prepackaged foods out of those vehicles. And so under this, they'd have to apply for a license and get one from the city clerk, and then they would have, that license would be valid for a year and would need to be renewed every year. But yeah, this would allow for ice cream trucks. This would allow for any sort of mobile sort of stores that are not actually preparing food in the vehicle.
Ice cream trucks dip the ice cream, or is it all gotta be prepackaged?
It's gotta be prepackaged. If you want Dippin' Dots, they gotta be in one of those.
Sealed
Right,
for health reasons.
right. So this is so they don't, so they don't have to go through quite the same protocols with the Department of Health.
Thank you, Kevin. Do we have anyone here who wants to speak for this request? Is anyone here to speak against the request? Anyone here to speak either for or against the request? Hearing none, motion to close the hearing, please.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Any discussion, council?
And this is just a convenience store on wheels, right?
That's absolutely correct.
And a convenience store without one of those little fried chicken places, right?
Absolutely, no deli on this.
No deli.
That's just the old one.
Just selling bags of Doritos and ice cream. I mean, honestly, somebody could drive around and sell bags of Doritos with this if they wanted to.
Absolutely.
The Dorito van,
Yeah,
all right?
yeah.
There you go, entrepreneurs get to, there you go.
Any further discussion?
Shavers chip van.
Shavers for chips.
It does have a nice ring.
Do we have any further discussion about this? Hearing none, is there a motion to move it forward for a second reading?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
So agenda item 7 passes forward to a second reading next week. Agenda item number 8 is a public hearing and first reading of ordinance 2023-12. This is the biggie, the ordinance adopting the Statesboro Unified Development Code. So, I need a motion to open the public hearing.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Kane, remind us about this.
I am going to defer to Ms. Field and Caleb on this one, if I may do so.
Yes, thank you. As you know, this has been a year and a half in the making, and so we are delighted to be able to present this to you for first read. And I do have Caleb Rassico here from TSW to answer any of your specific questions. Thank you.
Madam Mayor Pro Tem, I think at each individual space, we also provided you with a presentation, and Caleb is prepared to share that presentation with you if you are so inclined to do so, and for the public benefit as well. So you might want to consider asking them to do that.
Okay.
Well, I have a quick question from the other.
Okay, do we want to hear the presentation and then have our questions? Or is this a question about the process?
Yeah, I wanted to know how they reached out to, just for the record, I want them to outline how they reached out to the building community. I mean, because we're great, but I mean, we're not the ones that are gonna be affected by these ordinances largely. It's gonna be mostly the builders and developers. So, if you could just outline how you've engaged the developers and how you've engaged them along this process, because we tried to do this 11 years ago and the developers, freaked out. So, I just want to know what happened here a decade later.
Okay, if that's not sufficiently covered by Caleb, then we'll come back to Mr. Kenny or staff about that.
Yes, sir.
All right,
Yes,
thank you.
Councilman Boyum, we've had 2 meetings with the is it Statesboro or Bullock County Home Builders? We met with them at the beginning of the process to let them know what was going to be going on, to let them tell us what were important issues to them, and they shared a lot with us. We then went back to our office, wrote the draft ordinance, had a series of workshops at which they were invited, and then very importantly, we met with them to present the draft ordinance that is before you this morning for review and comment. We did receive several significant comments about that, particularly related to the stormwater regulations, and staff agreed that those were appropriate and those changes were made directly in response to those comments. So I would argue that it's been a very collaborative effort. They've been great partners in making sure that all of the regulations that we consider are appropriate for this community and are doable under this market and these economic conditions. And so I think it's been very positive this time around.
Thank you. So you want to do the presentation for us?
I am happy to if it can be pulled up.
Okay.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Mayor Pro Tem and Council, and members of the public who are present this morning. Again, my name is Caleb Rossico. I am Project Manager for the City of Statesboro Unified Development Code, and I'm here representing a much larger team who could not join us this morning. What I wanted to do this morning was to go through the process that we used to get where we are today, and then touch on some very important highlights and things that I think the city should, quite frankly, be very proud of in this UDC. If you can go to the next slide. So as a little bit of background, we were brought on board it's about a year and a half ago, next one please, to take a variety of city zoning and development related regulations that are currently found in many different parts of the Code of Ordinance and combine them into a single user-friendly document known as a Unified Development Code. A UDC is a tool that many jurisdictions are using to make them more business friendly, to make them more customer friendly, be it a builder or a small business, and then very importantly, to make them friendly for staff to administer. So what they do generally is they take all of these documents, we read through them, we put them into a single document, we make sure that there are no cross-reference problems or inconsistencies, and create what we call a UDC. Next. The process began with myself and others reading all of your existing plans and ordinances from front to back and conducting a series of stakeholder interviews, including, as I just mentioned to the council, with the home builders associations. Following that, thank you very much, we entered phase 2 of the process where we worked with the community to figure out what kind of regulations were important. You have a lot in your plans today. We heard a lot from the stakeholders, but we wanted to make sure that before we spent time and money writing anything, there was public support for that process. And so we spent about a year going back and forth with staff, the public, to come up with this draft UDC, which was then vetted earlier this year at a series of public meetings and has been refined to the point where we are right now. And I did want to mention the emphasis that this particular process has had on engaging the diverse stakeholders of the city. We have heard from home builders, we have heard from small business owners, we have heard from the Greener Borough Commission, we have heard from residents and other property owners to all understand from their perspective what things related to zoning and development regulations impact their lives or impact what they do. We've taken all of that advice into consideration. We have had a series of meetings with this body before us to talk about your opinions and your perspectives on a very important public policies, and have had a series of presentations to planning bodies, including the Planning Commission, to make sure that they're on board. So all of those parts of input have shaped where we are today. Additionally, we've had a lot of different types of engagement. We've had true in-person public meetings. We've had online surveys where folks who don't have the ability to go to a public meeting can look at a video of the presentation and then answer that way. And a series of, as I mentioned, technical briefings and work sessions with the City Council. And then finally, we conducted a diagnostic report early on in the process to understand from our perspective what kind of things were your plans calling for, was your community calling for that weren't being reflected in your current zoning and development regulations? That document is called the Diagnostic Report and identified a series of very important objectives to the community. Objectives around transportation efficiency, objectives around promoting economic development, promoting housing, and those two tend to go hand in hand, protecting historic and cultural resources to some extent, and environmental sustainability. So all of these 5 ideas have been in the back of our minds and have been the test upon which we considered various regulations as we wrote this code. So with that said, I wanted to touch on some of the very important highlights that I think the council should be very proud of, and then also members of the public. The first highlight is that I think we've done a lot of work on just cleaning up your ordinances. You, quite frankly, had some of the most outdated codes that I've seen in years. There were terms in there that probably come from the Standard Zoning Act of the 1920s that people don't use anymore. And so a lot of the process was just about cleaning up the language and putting together something that's more intuitive and user-friendly. And so what we've done is we've created a 5-chapter code that starts with all of the legal stuff, all the stuff our attorneys want us to have, then has zoning, subdivision, environmental regulations, which is a new definition, a new type of chapter, and then the definitions that we use throughout the code. And then we also have a series of other ideas that came up that don't actually belong in the zoning ordinance. So there was stuff about cable communications, there was stuff about cemetery maintenance, and a couple other very minor things that really shouldn't be in a UDC, should be in another part of the code. So we've thrown them in here as well, and are in your packet today for first read. So in terms of the first part of the process, the cleanup, I hope as you've looked through the code, you've noticed a lot of major improvements. We have tried to clarify the writing. And so in my last round of writing, what I did is I went through the UDC and tried to get rid of as much of the legalese as I could, tried to shorten things, try to make them more succinct and more understandable to everyone, not just, with all due respect, but not just to attorneys. We also tried to update all of the terms and references so that they were current, they were modern, and they were internally consistent. And then we added a lot of graphics and tables. I hope that is one of the major takeaways, is that you as elected officials or members of the public can pick up this UDC, can look at their property zoning, and can see every regulation in 2 pages with very clear tables. You don't even have to read it. You look for the kind of use you want to do, there it is, then you look at the setbacks, and it's all there nice and easy to understand. And then finally, there's been a lot of other behind-the-scenes work. We did have an attorney who helped us make sure that your code met the sort of state-of-the-art with regards to Georgia land use and zoning law, and part of that has been updating to make sure that we reflect all the recent case law in the state of Georgia. Now, in terms of those 5 overarching principles, I think we've done a lot to support them. In terms of promoting safe transportation and efficient transportation, we have updated various engineering standards in partnership with Mr. Washington to make sure that they reflect maintenance considerations of the city, to make sure that they reflect safety considerations of the city, and to make sure that they are things that his department can administer very efficiently and quickly. Additionally, we've put in place a lot of regulations that support expanding mobility types. We have standards for greater walkability, meaning, as I've talked about before, sort of encouraging walkable development in the downtown area, in the DSDA area. We've supported the vision of the Blue Mile with a special Blue Mile overlay that makes sure that development relates to that trail in a way that respects that facility and respects that creek. And we put in place very, very important standards for walkability, which is landscaping and shade. And I'll tell you, if you were to walk around Statesboro 2 weeks ago and it was 105 degrees, you would know the importance of shade to walkability in the summer. So all that has been put into this UDC. Additionally, we've spent a lot of time trying to make sure that you are more economically competitive. And that takes many different forms. First of all, we have created much more user-friendly rules, and so we haven't changed the rules a lot, but we tried to make them easier to understand. One area where we have changed some of the rules to make them more flexible in some areas, but a little bit tighter in others, has been your sign ordinance, which, as you know, has been the mother of all variance sources over the past 2 to 3 years. And so we reworked that. We think that what we've put together is business friendly and sort of balances the interest of businesses with the interest of the city. And very importantly, we've eliminated the need for a lot of types of variances in various parts of the city. So I mentioned we've made some changes to the sign ordinance, but we've also made it easier for builders to build on some of the older historic lots in the city so that they don't need a variance to build on a parcel that's been there since 1930. It's just a matter of right. We've also encouraged a lot of redevelopment and reinvestment. And I would argue that this is where your code was the most outdated. You did a great job at encouraging things like the new public shopping center or the sort of recently annexed subdivisions at the edge of town, but you didn't do as much as you could do on the redevelopment. And so we've created standards, as I've mentioned, to support reinvestment in older neighborhoods, the neighborhoods right around downtown. We've put in standards that support small businesses, so relief for certain standards. If you're going into an older building and you want to renovate it, that's treated differently than building a new construction at the end of town. I already talked about the Blue Mile, and then I've already talked to this body several times about all of the things that we've done to make it easier to invest and build in downtown Statesboro and the South Main Street corridor, all the way down to GSU. That downtown plan has also been really critical to guiding us. My firm worked on that 2 years ago, and so we were very familiar with it. But we've done a lot of stuff that is going to allow that vision to even come to more fruition. We've created a mixed-use zoning district that would replace the CR, which is a commercial zoning district for the entire South Main Street corridor. It incorporates urban design standards so that buildings have to pull to the street, have windows along the street, have parking to the side or rear, and they can do several things that were really important to the plan, like have housing, have multifamily, have mixed-use development. And housing has been one of the areas that I'm also most personally proud of. We have done a lot to simplify the residential zoning districts in the city. For a city of your size, you had more zoning districts than Atlanta. Like you have dozen residential zoning districts today. And so what we've done is working with staff, working with the body, we've consolidated them to actually match the size of lots. And so we've consolidated R6, R80, and R10 to R6. And then we've consolidated R15 and R20 into R15. And so that, I think, is going to make it easier for staff to administer the code. And then, as I mentioned before, you also had a huge number of barriers that made it really hard for someone who wanted to buy some older property in the center city and rebuild on it. And so we have made it much, much easier to build on what we call non-conforming residential lots. These are the older lots, again, from the 20s, 30s, maybe even older, that had houses on them, the houses were torn down, and the code just made it really hard to rebuild on them without getting a variance for using the lot, without getting a variance for setbacks, without getting a variance for everything else. And so we made it easy to build on those properties without any variance. They are by right. And we reduced the setback standards according to a sliding scale so that if you've got a lot that doesn't meet the zoning code but is in an older neighborhood, you can now go to a table and see what the coverage is going to be, see what the setbacks are going to be, and not have to go and get a variance like you used to do. And additionally, we've updated your R3 zoning district. This is your one of your sort of less intense multifamily districts to make it much more diverse. We have allowed single-family duplexes, triplexes, quads, live, work, and cottage courts. These are new housing types for Statesboro that were things that we heard from the public process are really important. We've also reduced the minimum house size from 1,050 square feet to 750 square feet. Again, I think that this is going to allow the building community to create smaller houses, but with more finish, and really respond to that market force that doesn't want the larger homes. Although, of course, if the larger homes are what the market wants, they'll continue to build that. And then we've allowed a couple of new housing types, as I mentioned, in a couple of new zoning districts. So we have re-legalized the walk-up, which is an older building that may look like a house, but might have 3 or 4 apartment units in it. This would be permitted in those older multifamily districts, in downtown, and then in the new mixed-use area, as a matter of right. We have created standards for cottage courts, and I know this is a kind of development that people have talked about in the past, and a couple have been built. We have put in place very specific standards for what they look like, how they have to be designed, what kind of open space they have to have, and have allowed those in all of the multifamily districts today, so R3, R4. In the R6 district with some limitations on the number you can have per block, and then in the downtown and the mixed-use areas. And then we've allowed accessory dwelling units or carriage houses in actually all of the residential districts. This would be, again, like a guest house that you could build in the rear of your lot. They tend not to be, when places allow these, they tend not to see too many that are built because they are quite expensive to build, but that's yet another housing type. You might have a child who wants to live, they want to live with you, but they want a separate home as they age, or your parents may want to move in with you and they may want a separate home when they age. So all of those living arrangements would be allowed by this particular housing type. And then finally, we learned very early on that when Statesboro talks about historic preservation, the real interest was not in very strict preservation ordinances like you might see in Savannah or like you might see in Macon. And so rather, there was really an interest in making sure that we had incentives or carrots to preserve historic structures. And so we've put in place several completely voluntary tools that we think will go a long way towards encouraging reinvestment in the older buildings in your city. The first thing that we've done is we have provided parking relief if you're reusing an old building. I think that all makes sense intuitively. If a building was built 100 years ago before there was a parking requirement, why can't it be reused? Well, it could be reused without a variance under this new code. We have made it easier to get relief for lot coverage or setbacks if your building is built and doesn't meet those today. So you can add, for example, a storage shed or a cooler if you want to open a restaurant without going through the variance process. And then we have proposed to allow some of the historic homes that may actually be zoned office today to be used as residential uses again, if people want to do them. It's sort of a legacy of how the city's zoning changed. You had areas like Zetterauer that were one time very large, beautiful houses, and then they converted to offices, but now they can't be used as housing again if someone wants to do that. And so this would allow them to continue as offices, but also have housing as an incentive in the existing building, not in new construction. And then the final part that
Back up on that real quick.
Yes, sir?
Are we allowing first floor apartments in the non-commercial corridors? So in other words, Main Street, you don't want to necessarily have your first floor, but, you know,
Yes, sir.
Second
Yes, sir.
Street, Third Street.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
We are allowing, if it's zoned, for example, if it's zoned for example, R3, R4, you can have ground floor commercial uses. The other thing, ground floor residential uses, I'm sorry. However, there was a provision in your current downtown ordinance today which says that the only thing you can ever have on the ground floor is commercial. And I understood where that came from. It came from a desire to have commercial, but at the same time, you can't have commercial on every block, on every street. And so what we've done in the CBD zoning is we've said that that only applies along the frontage, which is the part that relates to the street. But if you had a back portion of a lot, you could have ground floor residential. Now, it does still apply along all of the major streets. So if that's a problem, we can certainly talk about it, because I do think there's a benefit to really consolidating that. But on places like Zetterauer, for example, those could have residential on the ground floor.
Right.
Yep.
Well, and I mean, you go to Savannah, Liberty Street's got retail, Broad Street's got retail, but as soon as you go one block off of Broad Street or behind Liberty Street,
Yep.
you see, and even when you go further down on Liberty Street past the commercial areas, you start to see more residents on the first floor. So it just makes sense. I mean, your downtowns thrive on residents. So the more we restrict where you can put residents, the more that prolongs our growth of our downtown.
Yep.
So.
And then the final section that I wanted to talk about, and one where we've done a lot of work, in fact, a lot more work than I had originally envisioned, was in the environmental standards. And you know that we've had 3 or 4 work sessions to talk about various environmental ordinances. I wanted to remind everyone that the biggest thing that Statesboro is doing in this UDC to support environmental sustainability is by encouraging reinvestment in older areas and preventing suburban sprawl in the county or at the edge of the city. So that's a very important takeaway. But we've also made several updates. The first update is we have updated your urban forest standard, which is your tree ordinance. As directed by council at our last meeting, we have made it applicable to single family with 2 regulations. The first regulation is that the amenity space that developments are required to have would have to have 35% tree canopy on that. So if you were to create a park, you couldn't just have no trees on it. You would have to have canopy on it. Additionally, there is a requirement that every lot has to have 1 tree. We're not saying that that tree has to be in the front yard or has to be in the rear yard, but it does have to have 1 tree. That equates to about a 25% canopy coverage, which I know is not as high as the 35%, but that was what we had discussed with the council and mayor at our last work session, and so I took that and put it directly in the draft. We've also updated some of the general requirements to the tree ordinance, as you may have noticed. As we talked about before, we've raised the caliper size for trees to 3 inches. We have created much more flexible irrigation requirements than what you have today, and we've made some other very minor modifications based on our landscape architecture ordinance. Architects, I should say. And then the final thing that we've done is we have updated the stormwater ordinances. You may recall at our last discussion, we had talked about requiring the more stringent state water standard to apply in Statesboro. That has been completely removed from this UDC. Statesboro will continue to regulate stormwater as it does today. However, under state law, as the city grows, you will reach a point where, because of your, I believe it's called an MS4 permit, you are going to have to hold to the higher standard, but we're not going to make that apply until the city gets to that point.
So what is that point?
I do not know the
Population?
population. Is
It's
it?
generally population.
Yeah.
The threshold keeps changing over time.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
And the state requirements, that's all for Atlanta, which is not on, which does not have, deep water. So, everything in Atlanta runs off, everything here, so.
Yeah. There is a coastal supplement that is intended to support the soils you have here, where they just sort of go into the sand. But I'm not the engineer, unfortunately, so I can't speak to any of the technicalities.
One more question, for example, over by our public works place on Walnut Street, what street is it? Walnut's that way, I'm sorry. Anyway, a citizen had a tobacco warehouse, and it is all paid. So he was paying a lot of stormwater fees. You say that this gives him options to.
They still have to meet the state requirement for preserving, or for retaining, I believe, the first inch of runoff is what it says. Mr. Washington has greater flexibility in terms of the kind of techniques they use. So they can use more environmental sustainable techniques, they can use, your cisterns, any of that sort of thing. but we did give more options than there are today, but they do still have to meet the state runoff requirement.
Gotcha,
Generally, we did not change the stormwater utility ordinance. That remained the same.
gotcha. But, the options though, I mean, you know which one I'm talking about. Is this gonna help them have options to
reduce their.
reduce their,
utility.
what they have to pay, yes.
They can get discounts.
If development were to occur on that property, they would have additional options they don't have today. But if nothing changes on the property, then nothing changes in their application to fees.
You can get up to a 50% reduction if you do on-site retention of water, right?
That's right.
So, I mean, right now, all his water is running off his property.
Right,
So
and he has
that's-
options.
That's what he's paying for, the privilege of letting the water run wherever it goes. So when he puts in some systems that control that water and manage it, he can reduce it by up to 50%. I think Georgia Southern and some other large institutions have done that because they have an institutional process. But if he's just running it onto the concrete and then running it into the storm drain, well, it's really, the water's getting into the system faster than it should be because it's running off the roof and not running through the grass, so. Yeah, if you install something, you should be able to reduce it. And anybody can do that, right? Even a residential, if you put some stormwater, rain barrels, things like that, anybody can get a 50% reduction on that.
That's right. There are credits available in stormwater.
And then finally, we have updated the standards for outdoor lighting, especially, this really only applies to the major commercial parking lots, and most of the builders are doing this already. But there would be a requirement now that the lighting fixture has to direct the light downward to the ground rather than just going up in the air. And again, I've gone around town several times at night. I think all of your new development is already voluntarily doing this, because this is what most of the manufacturers are selling today, but we've just codified it in the unlikely event that someone bought a light fixture from 1970 and tried to put it up and it shined up in the air. And so I wanted to thank you. Thank you, pardon me, and I also wanted to mention very briefly the other text amendments that are before you this evening, or before you this morning. The first one is Chapter 22, which is an update to the broadband ordinances. Basically, you had a ordinance that was entirely focused on cable television. Mr. Washington, us, and our engineers have updated it to allow and respond to internet. And we've also responded to the FCC and the state of Georgia model ordinances for how cities and communities can regulate that. The second piece is the cemetery ordinance. Really, the only changes here are to allow veterans who are not from World War II to have a placard and to incorporate some maintenance requirements. Your code, again, was so old that it only talked about World War II veterans being able to have a marker, not veterans in more recent wars. And then the final provision is not really a change, it's to Chapter 38. The reason it's on your agenda is we have to take all of the stormwater materials from Chapter 38 and move them into the UDC. So if we didn't amend Chapter 38, we would have them there and we'd have them in the UDC. So all we're doing to 38 is taking out that stuff that's in the UDC, but there are no other changes proposed. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Then you don't have to dash away, you'll be here for discussion or further questions.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna go sit down.
Thank you very much. So moving through our process, is there anyone here who wants to speak for this request? And during our public hearing, is there anyone here who wants to speak against the request? Is there anyone here to speak for or against the request? Okay, hearing none, I need a motion to close the hearing.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, Madam Chair, in reference to all these ordinances, are the discussions on every one, or will you do a public hearing on all?
I think we're doing the chapters as well as the ordinance together, isn't that right, Leah? Everything he presented is what we're moving forward now? Is that the way it's?
We open a public hearing for the UDC only.
Oh, okay, so I do need to go through it for the chapters. Okay, you've got it broken down, so we can move through those individually.
However, if you wish, you can do the next three altogether.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you, saving us time. But for now, we have just closed the public hearing on the Unified Development Code, and now council can discuss before we move it forward or not. For discussion.
I just wanted to thank Caleb for all of your hard work. It took a long time for us to get here, so I really appreciate your time and effort.
Thank you.
I'm also very appreciative.
And Kathy, I'm sorry. Kathy, I don't want to leave anybody else out. John, everybody, thanks. And you did this with everybody. This was a collective effort.
Yeah, and I'm glad that you did the shout out for the Greener Borough and Tree Board and all those folks who showed up to try to have input and try to do what we can to make things as good as we can for all the people of Statesboro. So one thing I'm not clear on, we talked about it a little bit, but if you will, help me again to understand how this is going to, it's effective the day that we pass it, the second reading, it becomes effective. But folks who already have their variances, folks who've already gotten rezoned, help me understand how soon do we actually expect compliance?
Well, Councilwoman Barr, Mayor Pro Tem Barr is referring to the transitional provisions at the beginning of the ordinance. What these are is these talk about how the city can handle applications for the next couple of months. So say I'm a builder and I filed for a building permit today. And so what we've done there is we've basically defined several, I'm trying to pull it up here, several scenarios, meaning you've got your zoning changed or you've got your building permits applied. All of these scenarios have been written in such a way that they relate to how the state of Georgia defines vesting law. The state has a bunch of different cases about people who have tried to pull building permits and then the governments have changed the law and then whether or not they're vested under the old code. And so everything that we put in here effectively responds to that ordinance. So someone who may have filed for a land disturbance permit will be able to be processed under the code that was in effect when they filed. Zoning issues are a little bit gray. There is no absolute with zoning, but generally the way I have been advised, and I'm not this is not legal advice at all. This is from the attorney that we worked with, is that the state of Georgia looks at the level of effort that the applicant has put forth in terms of advancing the development proposal. And that is a very vague term, and you may wish to opine further on it. And so generally with zoning, there really is no absolute, yes, this is vested, or yes, this is not. It will be up to the individual case, the amount of effort, the amount of good faith that the applicant has put forth. I can tell you definitively, if they got zoning 10 years ago and they haven't moved anything, they will entirely be subject to the new code. But if someone filed in the past couple of weeks, that's where it becomes much grayer. And so we wanted to put in place at least some clarity, recognizing that staff, city attorney will need to work very closely with them to make sure that the law is followed.
Thank you. That does help understand that you're trying to keep us out of trouble.
I don't want you to get sued. Yes, that is correct.
My concern is that we're all up here working real hard trying to preserve trees and have a better quality of life and better canopy in Statesboro and mitigate climate control. And then people can come in and build and, oh, I got my permit 3 months ago, so I don't have to do that. It's kind of too late to protect things after they're all gone. So I'm wondering what the effect is, how much the development we already have in process, how many of them are really going to have to come into compliance with this, how long they have. Like everything we've already approved, they're going to have to comply with like our townhome, green space and amenities. Townhomes will, because that's already part of Statesboro's rules. But all the other new developments that we're approving basically don't have to.
Right?
And there's not really anything we can do about that.
Well, you can't go back and change the contract.
Right.
I mean, we made an agreement with these developers to build in a certain way. They planned accordingly. They have 2-year, 3-year building plans. It would be inappropriate for us to go back and change the rules. So, I mean, it's unfortunate, but that's just how it is. I mean, hopefully they'll comply. I mean, I would imagine the townhomes and certainly that building over there by Anderson Funeral Store off Wood Street, Brandon Street, whatever. I'm sure, yeah, Beasley, that's it. I'm sure those are all gonna be, pretty well developed, but, I mean, ultimately, you can't really go back this way, we have grandfather clauses and things like that.
And if I may, the way we wrote it is these transitional provisions apply to where the state law is very clear, which is related to land disturbing and grading permits and related to building permits. In all of those cases, you are generally vested as when you apply, the date of application. As I mentioned before, zoning is a little bit gray. And so we do not talk about zoning in here because we know that that is going to be a case-by-case scenario. But the state has said that if you apply for LDP, you are vested as on that date. And so I would not recommend to the city, as much as I know tree preservation is important, I would not recommend to the city that you try to go against that because I would worry you would lose in court.
Thank you. Any further discussion about the UDC? We do appreciate all your effort and all staff's effort to try to put together something, and we definitely want to encourage and support economic development and the builders and people trying to build us more houses. We just want to do it in a way that's the best for everybody. Okay, any further question, discussion? Then I'll call for a motion.
So
Move it forward for second reading? Second?
Second.
All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion passes moves forward for second reading. And so for our next three, let's combine. I'm gonna read the line items and then ask for a motion to open a public hearing and first reading on ordinance 2023-13. This is the ordinance amending chapter 22 cable communications that Caleb just told us about. We'll also combine it with ordinance 2023-14, the ordinance amending chapter 26 on cemeteries, as well as public hearing and first reading on ordinance 2023-15, the ordinance amending chapter 38 on the violence. That's all, we want to put those three together. So can I have a motion, please, to open the public hearing on those three?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor, signify by aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Kane, you want to combine those for us, please? Oh, we just kind of heard it from Kane. That's right. So I think we're pretty clear. Is there anyone here who wants to speak for any of these requests? Anyone here to speak against any of these three? Anyone here for or against these three? Okay, hearing none. Let's close the hearing. A motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. The motion is closed. Any discussion on these three? Council? I think Caleb did a good job of covering it for us. It says all stuff that needs to happen. So no discussion. I'll call for a motion, please.
So moved.
Second.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any against? Okay, so we have that motion. All three of those also pass forward for second reading. And that brings us up to agenda item 12, public hearing and consideration of a motion to approve application for an alcohol license in accordance with City of Statesboro alcohol ordinances. This is for Parker's number 20 at 141 Lanier Drive. Let's have a motion to open the public hearing, please.
So moved. Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any further comment regarding this application from planning and zoning? From fire inspection, police, city attorney, nobody has any problems with it? Great. And do we have anyone here who wants to speak for this request? Anyone who wants to speak against the request? Anyone for or against the request? Okay, then let's close the hearing. Can I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any discussion, council, on the alcohol license at Parker's number 20? Hearing none, can I have a motion to approve or disapprove?
A motion to approve.
So, say.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, so the motion for the application for the alcohol license is approved on agenda 12. Agenda item 13 is a public hearing and consideration of a motion to approve an application for the alcohol license in accordance with City of Statesboro alcohol ordinances for Birdie's at the Mall located at 325 Northside Drive East. This is actually old Bandy's at the back of the mall. I had trouble finding it, but it's going in where the Bandy's used to be next to the old Sears. So
Putting
we,
a bar?
a restaurant,
It's
bar,
a,
kitchen.
it's a golf simulation experience.
Oh.
It's not like Birdie's.
Okay.
Bring your own clubs and they mark where your ball goes and just play nine.
But why did they go with a bar with a kitchen? That seems like a more restrictive, I'm just curious.
People like to eat.
It's a more expensive, license fee.
Simply don't.
Okay.
Okay, so let's, open up our public hearing. Can I have a motion for that, please?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. And we had no, comment from the planning and zoning, fire inspection, police, or city attorney. All noted no objection. So is there anyone here who wants to speak for the request? Nobody here from Birdie's at the Mall?
I
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. So you are here and willing to answer questions if we have any?
I'll try.
Okay, thank you very much. Stand ready. Is there anyone here who wants to speak against this request? Anyone else here for or against the request? Okay, hearing none. Would you like to come and tell us a little bit about it? And identify yourself, please, sir.
I'm John Simmons, I'm the owner. Got 4 virtual golf bays, I have a full bar, bar food, restaurant type deal. Got thousands of courses on there, play all over the world. It's pretty impressive. Like if y'all
Congratulations.
attend,
Congratulations.
thank you.
Anything going in the mall is a plus.
It needs a little help.
And so once we get past this, when are you hoping to open?
As soon as the state lets me, as soon as I get the state license, hopefully soon.
Okay. Do we have any other questions for Mr. Simmons? Thank you for being.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for opening a new business in Cessbrook.
Thank you.
Okay, did we close the hearing? We need to close the hearing. A motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Question?
Madam Chair, I have to take action, I need to ask someone to.
Okay, sure. So we need a motion to approve or disapprove this application.
Motion to approve. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, so the motion passes. Mr. Penny, you have a comment?
Mayor, members of the council, this really goes back to Parker's and probably to any facility, any entity that owns several businesses in our community. Did have an opportunity a week or so ago to speak with Mr. Parker, and a couple of things that he asked, and so I have to bring it to your attention, and see how you all feel about it, because you set policy. Couple of things. For businesses that own several locations, when they apply for licenses, we require them to be fingerprinted. So if a business owns 7 locations, they have to be fingerprinted each time. And that is by ordinance. And so the question, and to Mr. Parker's point, was why should we have to be fingerprinted every time? And I'm bringing it to you for your direction, because I know, only being in Statesboro for 4 years, there's history here that I'm not aware of, and a lot of y'all, several of y'all are new, and we have 2 council members that have been here longer. And so it'd be, the question is, if someone has 7 locations, and in this case, this business was an existing business, and they chose to take that business down. They had an existing license, and so that license basically they paid for a year, and during the middle of the year, they decided to stop their operation, to tear the building down and build a new location. So they had to get this license again, but then had to go through fingerprinting again. So in this case, we have, I don't know how many locations they have, but on the north side, you're gonna have a new Parker's. And I'm saying this to Parker's, but it can be any business. So you're gonna have a new Parker's there, and then out on 67 on Fair Road, they tore down property that you annexed several months ago, and there's gonna be another Parker's. So it could require 2 more sessions of fingerprinting. But our ordinance requires that, so as long as the ordinance requires that, we have to continue to do that. So that being one, and Ms. Boyd, you raised your hand.
I was just wondering, is that a state requirement? That the locals have to do?
I don't believe so.
Yeah.
Well, the other question is if you've already been fingerprinted in the system, I don't think you have to be fingerprinted again. I think the problem he's having is his management is turning over, and so every year he's got another manager.
But it's not the manager, it's the owners. The owners are having to go through the fingerprinting, and that's by, and backed by ordinance. And so,
It's the corporate officers that have to be fingerprinted.
Really?
Yes.
So that's why I'm
We
bringing it
didn't have
up.
to do that in Marriott, we just had the manager.
The manager is understandable, but if it's the owner, so we've got 2 more locations. But if the ordinance is saying that, then I'm asking for direction from y'all and for permission to bring forward a revised ordinance, because with 7 or 8 or 9 locations and the same owners having to go through it every time,
I mean, if you're asking for like, okay, if you're a person who's been fingerprinted, and fingerprints are already on file, and we use those fingerprints on file for a subsequent application, I would say yes. But if you're talking about just waiving the fingerprint
No.
altogether,
no.
that's what you're asking for, right?
Yes.
Bob's on file, he got an application in January, then he applies for another one in April, he doesn't need to get fingerprinted again, that makes sense, yeah.
I would feel comfortable with it being a time period, because Bob can commit a crime. And we would, and so I think there should be some type of time period. I mean, and the rules are the rules. These companies who wanna come into the city, they have to follow the protocol.
And I'm not disagreeing with that, but I also think it's important that we might want to look at how other communities do this, because we want to be consistent. But obviously, it's your final call. And if you want them fingerprinted every time, then that's what we'll have to do. But we want to look at best practices as well. And so, if you are in agreement, then we'll bring something forward to you. But there was a second point as well. There's an issue with timing, and I'm not sure exactly how. And in this case, someone could actually get a CO, and the way the ordinance goes, they might have the CO for 30 days and wouldn't be able to sell alcohol, the beer and wine, until they come to the council for approval of a license. And I'm not sure how we address that. In this case, like the Parkers, this time, I think they had the CO a couple of weeks, and they could not sell, and they were open for business, but they couldn't sell beer and wine because they missed, and it might be them missing the timing, but it could be some of them and it could be some of us, and I'm not sure how we could address that.
Yeah, I mean, all due respect, I mean, if you've been building a convenience store for 1.5 years and you missed your alcohol license deadline, that's on you, because it's not that long of a process.
Okay.
And you gotta get the state one, so you know you gotta get the state one, but you gotta get the local one before the state one, so if you haven't done that, then they're dropping their own ball.
But to that point, I just wanted to mention it to you. We'll look at it and bring it forward to you in regards to, in particular, the fingerprinting, for sure. And the last point that I would want to make is, in the case of a rebuild, and not that we have these happening all the time, but in the case of a rebuild, in the case of Parker's, they had a license. And so during the course of that year, they decided to rebuild for, I guess for efficiency purposes and for updating. So the license was good, but it sort of held in abeyance. But we treat this as if it was a completely new. The address changed because I think they changed the orientation of the building from one street to another street. But again, just trying to make some common sense. And in this case, whenever the license comes back, they have to renew that license once every 12 months. And in this case, they will get a license, and come December or November, they have to renew that license. But the way we're gonna treat it, we're not actually gonna charge them for this new, for a few months. And I guess the question is there a way to, if council would be interested in considering some process that if we have that happen again, that the license just gets set aside. It doesn't mean they don't have to go through the same process.
Prorate pause,
But, right,
prorate pause, suspended.
Well, and yes, I mean, I see where you're getting at, but in this particular case, I mean, the address changed, the building changed. They didn't do anything proactive at the beginning, so I mean, he's kind of coming in after the fact, like, oops, I made a mistake, can you correct it for us? And it's like, well, we corrected it for you, now we gotta correct it for everybody, so we can't.
we have, whatever we do, we have to be able to feed everybody out of the same spoon.
Yeah, so I mean, I think those are situations that are almost unique. I mean, they're gonna be individual. I mean, I guess you could say, hey, can you put a pause on your alcohol license? But, then we start getting into how long the pauses are, and I mean, it starts getting into individual treatment of businesses as opposed to a standard of process. So, I mean, I hear his concern, but
And I'm not
I
saying.
mean, if you change the address, you have to change all your licensing anyway. I mean, because you won't be able to get insurance on a building that you got the wrong address. So, I mean, all that stuff has to be changed anyway. So.
We'll come back to you, especially on the fingerprinting piece. And we'll look at how other communities are doing it. And I won't tell you we'll be ready in 2 weeks, but probably by the 1st of October. We'll come back.
I don't know if this together.
Yeah, you mentioned the fingerprinting. What would be your, like if somebody's been fingerprinted within the past 12 months, would that be acceptable?
I have no idea. I mean, do we know how long fingerprints last?
What do you mean?
Forever.
I know they last forever, but I mean, that's when I worked at the airport, we had to get fingerprinted, but after a certain time, if you got a new job, you had to get fingerprinted again, but it's like 6 months, or, I mean, cause you can commit a crime the next day.
Well, that's the point. Your fingerprints don't change, but
I know.
the search could change.
Right.
The background, and I mean, we'll look at best practice. We also talk with chief, and look how other communities are doing it, and we'll bring that to you. Great, okay.
And we love Parker's, everyone go to Parker's, it's in my district, they open, it's nice, they have a kitchen now, so, yay Parker's.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Penny. So we're on, in the agenda, we're down to item number 14, consideration of a motion to approve resolution 2023-40. This is a resolution to adopt the first amendment to the fiscal year 2024 budget for each fund of the city of Statesboro, appropriating amounts shown in each budget as expenditures, expenses, adopting several items of revenue anticipations, and prohibiting expenditures or expenses from exceeding the actual funding appropriated. Mr. Penny, this is the bookkeeping basically.
Madam Mayor Pro Tem, basically, all of our capital improvement items that we didn't finish last year, we need to roll forward to this year, and that's what this budget amendment is all about. It's nothing new, it's all things that that appeared in our capital improvement plan. 12 months seems like a long time, but it really isn't. And so we recommend approval of the budget amendment.
Thank you. Any discussion? Council, then I'll call for a motion. Do we want to approve this resolution?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So the motion carries. We approve item 14. Agenda item 15, consideration of a motion to approve resolution 2023-41. This is a resolution to adopt standard operating procedures and policies for city boards and commissions.
Madam Mayor Pro Tem, at the retreat, we talked about having standard operating procedures for our boards and commissions. And so staff worked on a draft. We presented it to you back in April, and just over time, we had not done anything with it, and we came back to you at the last work session. And these standard operating procedures, if you approve them, is how we will operate with each board or commission that is appointed, and we do recommend approval.
So these have already been sent to the different commissions and boards. We already have in effect. I know I've seen them. And it's an effort to try to make things smoother and more consistent, and also to keep record keeping a little better, because I know our city clerk has had a time figured out when the term expires, and all of these boards and commissions, people serve for a year or 2 years and then need to be reappointed. And so trying to get them to do a better job helping with the bookkeeping, so we can keep folks effective and functioning. Any questions or further discussion about it? Then I'll call for a motion, please.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. So we are adopting the standard operating procedures and policies. Agenda item 16, consideration of a motion to approve resolution 2023-42. This is a resolution updating the language access plan for the city of Statesboro. I was really interested to read through this. Do you want to tell us what this is?
Yeah, and the reason we have this before you, we received the EIP grant, an Employment Incentive Program, Community Block Development Block Grant, in particular for the Bouchon Park Aspen Air Jail. And as one of the requirements is that we have this language access plan approved. And so that's why we have it before you today. It is very interesting and to see all the different languages. And when you use the federal funds, they want to make sure that there are no barriers in being able to communicate with people. And it really speaks volumes when you think about our community and not that we weren't a diverse community before, but with Hyundai coming on board and with 3 suppliers from Hyundai coming into our community, and people of different from different countries, it's just important to have anyway. And so we do recommend approval.
Thank you. I don't know if y'all had a chance to read through it, but basically it's based on census data. How many people who have limited English proficiency, and be sure you have enough people in that category, then you have to make the language more accessible, provided in their language. And we have fewer than 5% of folks who are limited in their English, according to census data here in Statesboro. The highest is not quite 4% of these people speaking Spanish. So we are not required to do any of that, basically, is what we found out, but we are. We're making the cards available in areas so people can indicate, I need help with languages, and have an officer, Marcus Trejo is the person that you contact if you have somebody who needs language. So I'm glad to hear that we're doing it. Even though we're doing it because we had to get federal grants, it's still.
We need to do it in.
Yes, thank you. So I'll call for a motion to approve the resolution, please.
So moved. Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. So we have, moved forward. I have agenda item 16. Number 17, consideration of a motion to approve the guidelines and application for the Security Enhancement Incentive Program. Remind us about that.
Mayor Pro Tem and Council, at the last work session, Ms. Olympia Gaines did a great job of explaining the guidelines for the Security Enhancement Grant. remind you that you were authorizing us to use $80,000 of interest from ARPA funds in order to try to get some of the apartments that have high incidence of crime to use some technology. And so what this will do, this grant opportunity will fund up to like $20,000 or 50% of the cost to install technology with camera. In order to do it, we need to be able to see things at night. So it's not just that it operates during the day, it needs to be able to operate at all times. And so the funds the grant will be available as long as the funds last. It does not go back and it's not retroactive. This is going forward. And what we would do, if you approve this, these guidelines, we will notify the properties that are of particular note that have some of these concerns and let them know that these funds are available. And then we will work with them and they'll need to go out and get quotes and bids. And hopefully we can get some of these items implemented. I think what you're seeing is because people don't like to talk, it's important to have technology that can keep track of people's coming and going, and this will help us do that. And following up on Councilmember Mack's request, once you approve this, we'll also reach out to folks like Park Place and make them aware that these funds are available. And so we do recommend approval of these guidelines.
Thank you. Any discussion, council? And I'll call for a motion, please.
So.
Second.
So we're moving to approve it.
Yes.
Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So agenda item 17 passes. Agenda item 18, consideration of a motion to approve the purchase of required equipment to upfit 8 patrol cars in the Statesboro Police Department, not to exceed $286,000. Mr. Kenny?
Madam Mayor Pro Tem, we need authorization to be able to expend these funds. And as you can see, it's not cheap when you buy the vehicle, then you gotta upfit them, and that it comes at a cost. Thankfully, we have SPOS funds that we're able to do that, so we do recommend approval.
Thank you. Any discussion, council? Then I'll call for a motion to approve the purchase.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And that motion passes unanimously. Agenda item 19, consideration of a motion to amend the development agreement with LNS Acquisitions LLC to provide a term extension for installation of infrastructure associated with Fernhill Farm subdivision. So you want to tell us about that one, Mr. Kenny?
Yes, ma'am, I was just, as a part of our housing incentive program, the Fernhill's development was approved. However, we had noticed that development had stopped and we didn't know what was going on, and so we went out there and looked, because they were going gangbusters, and then all of a sudden everything came to a halt. But in our research, what we found is the summer has been hot, but it's also been wet, and the rainy weather was causing problems, and the contractor would go out there and work on the site, but then we'd have rain and it wipe away everything that they had done. And so we want to see this development. It's an 80-lot subdivision inside the city. And so in order for them, I think they were gonna have to be completed sometime in October. They're not gonna make that. And so we're asking for permission to approval to extend their time limit, 6 months, to April 5th, so that they can get the infrastructure in place and hopefully start building houses, and we do recommend it to you.
And so extending it means that they can still get some of the benefits under some of the subdivision programs that they've applied under?
Yes.
Any questions or concerns from council? And I'll call for a motion.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? So we have approved the time extension. Do we have other business from city council? Wow, we got to get in.
Well, at some point since we've done this UDC, and we've all talked about it up here, I'd like to revisit our blight tax that is on the books, but is completely ineffective because our rate is 0.001. This blight tax was passed more than 4 years ago, but the mayor, set the rate at such a low, it has no effect on anything and it's not applicable. My recommendation, and I don't know if I need to make a motion, but I'd like to change the wording of our ordinance so that way council is able to set that percentage or that multiplier, and that multiplier needs to be 10. So these people that have dilapidated buildings that are not used and nobody's living in them, and they're not residential, we're talking commercial only, commercial industrial. You know, we need to encourage these folks to redevelop, and you know, some folks only see cash. And so when you take a $2,000 a year property tax and change it to $20,000 a year, all of a sudden that wakes them up and hey, it's time to do something with this property. The city has invested in infrastructure, we've invested in police, we've invested in fire, we've built roads, we put in utilities. And you know, the properties that are in the city need to generate, you know, money for the city. That's how they're supposed to work. So again, I don't know how we do this, but I'd like to revisit the blight tax and get that multiplier up to 10. Now, Kane, you said that the mayor has the ability to change this rate. I still disagree with that. How do we change the ordinance so that way it puts it in the hands of council?
The reason that the mayor, I believe that council by 4-1 can override the mayor's adjustment.
They never came to an override vote, so.
Right, I mean, so we can still get to that override vote, is what I'm saying, if council seemed.
I mean, it was supposed to happen, but it never did. It's required that any veto gets brought up before council the second time. Never did. 4 years later, it still hasn't been brought up. John, I'm sorry, Councilor Reed. Like that.
I'm just kind of confused. It's already set where council can disagree with the mayor and override a 4-1.
That's correct.
But you're asking for new language to go ahead and just put it in our,
I don't understand the language as it is. The language sets a multiplier on property tax. Kane seems to think that the mayor can adjust that multiplier. I'm not sure why, because the mayor has line item veto. Yet, we set the tax rate, we set the budget, so if we set a 10 times rate, why should one person be able to change that? I'm not really sure. So, my point is it shouldn't be in the hands of one person. And so, whatever changes we need to make to the ordinance, I'd like to do that, but I'd also like to raise it to 10 times. So if you just want to override it, we can do that.
So the ordinance does not allow the mayor to do that. It's from the apportion-based veto that's in the charter. So that's where that comes from. So it wouldn't be able to be changed just via an ordinance pathway. But there, like I said, there remains that ability. Anytime there's a mayoral veto, it can be overcome by a supermajority 4-1 vote of the council.
But it has to be put on the agenda for
It
that
has
to
to be
happen.
on the agenda, and two of y'all could ask for it to be put on the agenda.
No, it's required to be put on the agenda after a veto. It is required to be on the agenda. It has never been brought up a second time.
I mean, that was, I'd have to go back and look at the record. It was 4 years ago, like you stated a minute ago. If y'all want to bring it forward or have council discussion at a work session or whatever, y'all can direct that today though.
I mean, I certainly would like to, yeah.
I'm confused. I need to go back and read the language.
So I don't understand the apportionment either, because we're not setting a budget item, we're just setting a tax rate. So could you explain why apportionment calls into play here when we're setting a number, not an amount?
Councilman Boyd and I discussed this issue in 4 years. Please give me some time
That's fine.
to discuss it, to reanalyze it.
That's fine.
Like you say, it's 4 years ago. My memory was that it passed, that we were going to adopt the blight tax, and then learned that it was actually the mayor's responsibility, privilege to set the rate
That's not true.
specifically.
I disagree with that. So we set the rate. He said he's allowed to move the money or a line item because it's an apportionment issue, but I don't understand how it could be an apportionment issue because you don't know how much money is being budgeted. You can only apportion something if you have a fixed budget. You can't apportion 12%, you can only apportion $1 million. See what I mean?
So it seems like we do have enough confusion and at least two people on council who want some clarity so we can direct staff to research and come back to us with what our options are.
Please.
Is that what you want to do?
Yes, ma'am, please.
Mr. Kenny?
I get it.
Thank you. What else?
And I guess my question is this something you want on the work session for next time?
It's possible. I mean, we're redoing all these ordinances in the UDC and everything, but if we can't encourage people to redevelop, or if we can't, you know, especially the properties that are in the dilapidated state, right? I'm not talking about people that are actively using their property. We're talking about property that's been vacant for a long time, and we know the property. We know what they are, yeah.
Okay, I got it.
Okay.
Be on the work.
And let me put this out there for sure, and Kane, if you could please confirm this. That ordinance is very clear. Residents that occupy are not included in this. So I don't want to hear this is going to affect poor people and kick them out of their house or gentrification or anything like that. We're talking about unoccupied, dilapidated, commercial and industrial property.
Thank you, Mr. William. Thank you, Mr. Kenny and Mr. Smith. The other thing I think I ought to share is many of us are aware that the rates are rising again. CDC doesn't carry that information like they used to, but it is out there. Somebody in my church finally found a source, and Bullock County has gone from low transmission of COVID to medium transmission of COVID, which generally indicates encouragement to wear masks, but it's not mandated by law anywhere now. And individuals like different businesses or agencies can put up their own guidelines. And our door sign now says, because we're back in medium transmission, masks are encouraged but not required. We require it in my church when we get to high transmission. So just calling that to our attention. We want it to be gone, but it's not quite. So get your boosters, wear your masks, take care of yourselves. Do we have other announcements or news to share? We're in a campaign season again. If you're following the news, if you're watching this report, who follows the news and know that we have at least one contested race right now. And election day will be November 7th. Okay? No other business. So, Mr. Penny, City Manager's comments, please, sir.
Thank you, Madam President. I have several items. First, I just want to call to your attention in the FYI packet. There's a memo in reference to our long-range transportation public meeting, and that first meeting at the last work session, you had a presentation from the consultants that are leading that effort. So on September 25th at 6 o'clock at the First Methodist Church on South Main Street, we have our first public meeting. So just want to call that to your attention, and then want to also just mention to you, and I hope we finally get going, the housing rehabilitation memo. We've awarded 15 contracts, and so and had previously done 6. So now we just got to get work going and on those projects. It's just been a long time coming, but hopefully we're going to see some improvements. Get started real soon. Want to call to your attention that our tax rate public hearings will be a week from today at 12 o'clock in this room, and then again at 6 o'clock. And so staff has prepared a presentation on the increase, and increase looks significant because part of the increase, we have to actually roll back our rate from 7.308 to 6 something, because that amount of money, that rate would have yielded us the same amount of revenue. And so So the increase is like some 40% increase in our proposed tax rate. However, our increase is basically due to personnel, and looking at a $2 million increase in particular in the general fund. But we will be prepared for a presentation on September 12th at 12 o'clock, and then again at 6 o'clock. And then the final public hearing will be at your city council meeting on September 19th at 5:30 p.m. Next item, street name. At the last meeting, we talked about changing West Grady Street from West Grady Street to Loretta's Way, and the mayor sent me a note this morning. And I think the request is now not to change West Grady Street, but I believe it's Brown Street that would be changed. And so we need to start that process. And part of it was for me to notify you of that. So West Grady Street will remain the same, but it's Brown Street that they're looking to change from Brown Street to Loretta's Way. And so we'll start the process to notify the property owners on Brown Street of the proposed change.
Does that touch Livermore Park?
It's right down the street from Grady Street Park. The weekend park. I do want to just say that there is a grant announcement, so I won't try to go into a lot of detail because we are supposed to announce it. And it's not a grant that's coming to the city, but the city is impacted. But there's an announcement tomorrow at 1 o'clock on the campus of Georgia Southern. And we'll make sure that if you're able to be there, just let you know there's a lot going on tomorrow with that announcement at 1. There's also a signing out at Georgia Southern with Ogeechee Tech, Georgia Southern, and Hyundai. And this is all part of trying to tie together all the activities that are going on with suppliers and Hyundai. And then Jason and I will be attending a lunch over in Savannah that is being hosted by Chatham County commissioners with the DOT rep, talk about the improvements for highways. And Bullock County has minimal compared to what's going on in Bryan and Chatham County. But it's one of the first times since the announcement of Hyundai that they invited all of the governmental entities that are being impacted. So I want to make you aware of that as well. But that announcement is a great announcement for the staff person who's going to be leading this environmental effort in city buildings. And so there'll be more coming out there tomorrow. I don't want to mess up. And so Dwayne, you don't have to publish this and Al, because we don't want to lose the grant. But the grant won't actually come to the city. And then I want to go back to the Elf Lodge. We shared some information with you a few weeks ago, and we had asked for council's authority to be able to address alcohol license at the Elf Lodge. However, it was a non-conforming use, and they lost that non-conforming use because of inactivity over so many days, so many months. And so we looked at, they did come in to apply. However, we have a proximity issue. And so the question is, how or if we even consider issuing a license to that location. And I will just say to council, council can obviously change the policy and allow alcohol license to be awarded, but we caution you on that because of proximity, because it'd be hard to do without opening that up to every residential area in the city of Statesboro. We have talked with the gentleman, I can't remember his name,
Lost right now.
about the possibility, and this is, be a way for council to consider. We do not allow brown bagging in Statesboro. Although state law allows brown bagging, we don't allow it in Statesboro. And there's a good reason not to allow it. And part of it has to do with, we receive quite a bit of revenue from the sale of alcohol. And if you allow brown bagging, some of our revenue might take a nosedive, but one option might be to consider for a nonprofit to allow brown bagging versus issuing a license for that location. But I'm just simply saying, council will need to consider it, and you need to give me some direction. Is it anything that you would even want to consider? It's an awkward place for us to be. And as I told you, in my tenure in Statesboro, I'm not as used to having to deal with alcohol so much. But we have the license and we have home rule when it comes to alcohol. But to simply go back and change the ordinance to allow this one location, I would not be able to recommend that. But and the gentleman has spent significant money to upgrade that property. But in order to get a bar and alcohol license, it would require this council to completely change proximity requirement. And professionally, I can't recommend that to you. But I could say we can look at the brown bagging if that is something that the city council was inclined to do.
Thank you, sir. Do we have any opinions we want to express or direction for staff about whether to consider the brown bagging or anything else for the, is it a Goose Lodge, an Elks Lodge?
Elks Lodge.
Elks Lodge.
I think that we should consider the brown bagging, but as far as going back and changing something just to accommodate them, no. I'm not in agreement with that.
So the brown bagging would be changing something to accommodate them.
Well, it's required by state allows it, so.
True.
If the state allows it, why can't we?
Well, to be clear, the state has bare minimum guidelines, and the reason they do that is, as Charles said, because of the home rule. I mean, as Charles said, you start brown bagging, now you have a problem with those event centers, because now you can just have a gathering place and you can do brown bagging. So, now all of a sudden you have the ability to do these parties again. So, I mean, unlicensed parties when we're selling to underagers is the biggest problem we have. Whatever we gotta do to prevent that.
So in this case, we wouldn't, and our attorney would work with it, we would not open it up so that brown bagging would be legal. It would only apply to a nonprofit operation. And so it would, but again, I'm not trying to, if council wants us to do a little bit more research, we can bring that before you at the next, work session and go into a little bit more detail. But I wanted to make sure the council understood where we stood on the proximity piece, and if there's a way to, because honestly, the first time, and I don't know why I say honestly, because I always try to be honest with you, the owner of the gentleman who made the call initially said, well, people can do brown bagging, and I said they can't, because by law, we don't allow brown bagging. But if you wrote it in a way that it, for a nonprofit, then that would not open brown bagging up to every entity. And as Mr. Boyd, well, for every event, it would not be allowed unless they, because most of those are for profit. This would be for a nonprofit, if you want us to consider that.
We got a lot of nonprofits in Statesboro.
Another alternative is you could do a specific exemption as to this location only. And that way, because I wouldn't recommend changing chapter 6 on it anyway. However, I could, very narrowly fashion a resolution that would create precedent and would create, hopefully enough safety measures that y'all would feel comfortable granting that if y'all felt so inclined, such as require them to have insurance that licensed places would have to allow, require them to allow PD and fire right of entry at any time. There are things we can do, and there are ways we can do it where it doesn't open it up to anybody else, if that's what y'all would like for us to do.
I like that option because they were already grandfathered. So,
And of course, that creates a super unique situation. Exactly what you mentioned, Councilwoman Chambers, that they, this is very, very unique to this set of facts. COVID, the year, all of that stuff. So there are ways we can do it without opening it up for everyone else or to anyone else.
Thank you.
I like that option.
I saw you nodding, Councilman Riggs. Okay, so.
What is it?
We're gonna ask you to draft something to bring back to us then,
But we will do it at work session.
talk about it in work session.
It's not the grandfathering though, that's unique. There's other properties in town that could fall into that grandfather clause. On 301 over by the campus, so it can't be just grandfathering, that can't be the only reason.
It's not. I just use that as just one of the examples that Councilwoman Chambers brought.
Is anything
There
in
are
the
plenty
plaza
others.
is under the same thing, anything on 301 where there used to be something and now there's not, could be construed, no, you can't say COVID, but just want to be careful.
Thank you. So is there a need to go into executive session?
Yes.
Okay, for personnel, real estate, or potential
Personnel
litigation?
and.
Madam Mayor, we do public comment.
I'm sorry, yes. Okay, skip something, thank you for keeping me on track. So public comments, and I believe we do have 2 people who have signed up for public comments. And we allot 2 minutes, 2.5 minutes, which is it? 2. So we allot 2 minutes per person once you get to the podium, and we have signed up Ms. Virginia Smith, who wants to talk about city buses. Please come and talk to us.
I want her to come with me.
Okay.
It's gonna be short and sweet.
This short.
Is this Ms. Jones?
Yes.
Okay, good. I
This
have
Ms.
each of you
Jones.
signed up for 2 minutes, so however y'all want to
Okay.
go away.
We are catching the city bus now. And it's like 3 of us from Newport Trace that got together and we started going, and then we told our senior citizens at the center about it, and they want to, ride also. So what we need, if it could be possible, we need a bench where we could sit down, because we have to walk from our apartment, our place, and go to the end of the street and wait for the bus. And yes,
And we live at, Newport Trades Apartments on Court Lee Hill Boulevard, right across from Statesboro High. And, we love riding the bus and stuff, it's convenient, costs $1.
Yes, ma'am.
Hey. But, like I said, we need somewhere to sit down for the shade and stuff, or, maybe in the rain, just to sit down, cause especially you have back problem, knee problem, et cetera, et cetera. So if I can just recommend that to someone, and to the social security place too, we have to go there. We need somewhere to sit there too.
Okay, we'll get on it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
okay,
All right, thank you.
thank you.
Y'all have a blessed day.
Y'all are enjoying the bus?
Oh, yes, we
Yeah.
enjoyed the bus, so we can just
Right.
get somewhere to sit down.
Oh, it's not free.
When you get the,
It's not free.
Oh, I know, a dollar, you can't beat that though.
I know, you can't beat that
So
dog.
y'all ride it how? Every day?
Well, how often we can ride it,
Gotcha.
but it's convenient for us, but we just need somewhere to sit down and stuff.
Miss Virginia, when y'all get the seat, tell your friends we did this.
Okay.
Y'all get bragging rights for when you see the seat.
Okay.
Tell your friends, I did this.
All right.
Okay.
All right, y'all have a blessed day.
Thank you both.
Bye-bye.
So, Jason, we can take a look at that and see, I mean, it's on the Statesboro High School property, but
we'll look at it.
Great. Thank you, ladies.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Okay, and that's all the public comments. Thank you. So now we're moving down to agenda item 23, consideration of a motion to enter into executive session to discuss personnel and potential litigation in accordance with OCGA 50-14-3B. We need a vote to go into executive session,
So
please.
moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And we will take a 10-minute recess and close the doors while we handle those matters. Thank you all for being here today.